the advocate would clearly define what a mass shooting is. It's four people or more that are involved in a shooting in a public place. But what we need to keep in mind is that the Gun-Free School Zones Act was not intended to prevent mass shootings. That actual act was created in a time, it was in the 1990s, in a time when gang violence was prevalent, when drugs were also highly prevalent in high schools and trickling down to middle schools and elementary schools. And so the Congress came together and decided that in order to keep drugs and gangs and guns, because all three of those go together, out of the school campuses, they would enact that gun-free school zone, meaning no guns allowed on campus. But that's not entirely true. Guns are allowed on school campuses if they are a sworn officer of the law. So if a policeman enters, if a school resource officer or a security guard that is contracted by the school, they are welcome as long as the school is permitting them to be on that campus. So proposals offered by the gun lobby to arm teachers and repeal gun-free school zones are dangerous and counterproductive. A study, Gaber Thomas, he wrote a book called Confronting Gun Violence in America just recently, and he put that there is no reason to believe such proposals will help curb rare instances of gun violence at school. Teachers are not trained law enforcement officers. Their purpose is to be educators and role models. Further, the gun lobbies claim that gun-free zones invite mass shootings has been thoroughly debunked by research showing that the overwhelming majority, nearly 90% of all high-fatality gun massacres since 1966, have wholly or partly occurred in locations where civilian guns were allowed or there were armed security or law enforcement present. So a lot of the instances that he cited were like clubs and other places. There's also been many mass shootings on government properties like Fort Hood. All those places had people with guns, access to guns, and the people that had the guns were not able to stop the people who were attacking. So it's contrary to think that having more guns or getting rid of the Gun-Free School Zone Act would actually reduce any of that at all. And teachers are civilians, and civilians have been found not to stop mass shootings. While the gun lobby claims that armed citizens routinely avert crimes, national research by the Department of Justice indicates that people rarely use guns to defend themselves in this way. According to an analysis of 14,000 responses to the National Victimization Survey, victims of crimes involving personal contact with the perpetrator use guns less than 1% of the time. So even when they have the opportunity to use guns, most people don't react quick enough or choose not to. They choose to run, they choose to hide, they choose to get others to safety versus confronting an active shooter. Arming teachers will not resolve the problem of mass shootings. The Johns Hopkins Center for Gun Policy and Research found that proposals offered by the gun lobby to arm teachers and repeal the gun-free school zones are dangerous. I already said that one. Never mind. And then teachers themselves don't want to do it. If you ask any of the teacher unions, such as, let's see, well, the Florida teachers oppose it. Anna Fusco, she's the president of the Broward Teachers Union, which is where the Florida shooting took place recently. She visited with the Sun Sentinel, which is a newspaper in Florida, and they voiced strong opposition to the plan. She says the president has had daily conversations with teachers from the school where the tragedy took place, and they have said, we're teachers. We want to have funding to have the best resources in our schools to bring the best education to our students. We don't want to walk around with guns on us. There are several other associations, such as the National Association for School Resource Officers, that oppose it. They would rather have a collaborative approach and use properly trained officers that will collaborate with school staff. Also, the National Association of School Safety and Law Enforcement officials oppose it. They say that the vast majority of teachers want to be armed with textbooks and computers, not guns. Kenneth Trump is the president of the National School Safety and Service Security, and he says that adding weapons to schools would in turn increase the chance of a gun falling into the wrong hands, They also point out that an armed guard on campus was unable to prevent the mass shootings at Columbine. The Florida shooting, there was an armed officer at that place as well. And Janet Robinson, she was the superintendent at the time of the Newton shootings and Sandy Hook, and she rejected the idea that armed teachers could have stopped the massacre at Sandy Hook Elementary School as well. So, and then as far as the actual plan of arming teachers, so they don't want to do it, but in addition to that, where is all this funding going to come from? Is the school board going to have appropriate and adequate policies to govern the carrying and the use of firearms for teachers? What type of use of force continuum will they have to develop and think about? What type of firearms are going to be okay? You have to think about, what type of weapons are they going to be arming the teachers with? Are they their own personal guns? If so, who's is responsible for maintaining them and cleaning them and making sure that they're adequately locked up? There's so many questions as to how this would work. Does the school district, are they going to provide regular and ongoing training to this staff? How often? What types of weapons in the retention training are they going to use, and do they take into the account how they can, teachers could be potentially disarmed by students in any number of opportunities. I mean, I personally work at a high school, and teachers lose their keys to their classrooms and to the campus so often that things have to be rekeyed constantly, and that is a cost and is also a risk. Because if the guns are being locked up on campus and those keys are being lost, it's a potential for disaster.